Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of KFC SuperCoach TV. Leading into round 19. Sorry, we're running a tiny bit late today, but hopefully we can get through some questions and some news that we need to know before the round kicks off on Friday night. We've got a little bit more time, I guess, this week, which is helpful. But just when we thought we might get through a week without too much carnage, there's been some pretty big news in the last hour or so out of Adelaide. So we've got the perfect man here to talk about it. But Phantom, before we get to that, we need to talk about your team and your score because you're back, as far as I can tell, based on last week's numbers.
Too kind, Al. You pumped me up during the week as well. I appreciate it, but unfortunately, too little, too late, I think, for me. Had a pretty good week, but Rory Atkins led my team a KFC SuperCoach ton to cover the carnage that was last week. Really helped. So hopefully, he can crawl back a little bit of ground from here to get somewhere near respectable again after being an interesting year. But again, just as we thought, as you mentioned, everything was looking okay this week. All these players were coming back. Zach Brothers' scam was clear. Well, everyone's going to have 24 premiums to pick from. Matthew Nix comes out and does a Ken Hinkley. I guess we know Ken in the past has put KFC SuperCoach out of their misery early. Nixie has done that as well this morning down at West Lakes, confirming Rory Laird won't play. That shoulder, the AC joint injury knock that he got last week, and he came on and played the last quarter, is a bit sore. So they're not going to risk him, not going to take him over to Melbourne, which is a big blow. I think he's owned in by like 98% of teams in the top 1%. About 95 of the top 5% own Rory Laird too. So we're all in the same boat, probably all about the cover, and maybe if you're out there, you've got a few trades, we'll look at replacements too.
I mean, would you consider trading him? How much do we actually know about this injury that he's got? He played through it last week and he was fantastic in that last quarter. So hopefully you think that means it's not too bad?
Yeah, I think so. I sort of wrote last night when I was writing my burning questions before the news. I thought, he's played through pain before, did it earlier in the year, did it in the last quarter last weekend against the Giants too. So I thought maybe the knock didn't go for scans. I think it was more just a pain management thing. It's sore for him. It's not going to, not going to do any drastic sort of surgery or anything required right away. So it's more about what he can deal with. So I'm hoping holding back in for the showdown next week. So no, I wouldn't be trading him. A 1 week injury at this stage of the year with only 6 rounds to go obviously is worth more consideration than it would be in the first 6 rounds with a premium. But again, you've probably got some other issues. Maybe you kept Tom Green last week and the Giants confirmed again earlier this week that he'll miss another fortnight. So you look to trade him before you trade Rory Laird, unless you're flush with trades out there and you've got 6 or 7 to luxury move around with.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure how many people are in that situation, but I definitely won't be trading Rory Laird. I think that both of us have Marcus Windhager on the bench, who was really good last week. I think it was career high disposals, 27, and scored 90 KFC SuperCoach points. So he was covering Josh Dunkley last week, and I might need him this week to cover for Rory Laird. But I think I will be trading Tom Green, missing another 2 weeks. So 2 out of the last 6 weeks is, a fair chunk of what's left. So your man, obviously, Phantom, that must have been pretty tough news when the Tom Green injury came through. But are even you going to have to say goodbye to him in KFC SuperCoach?
Well, I was a bit flat out because firstly, the Giants still have not invited me to the Tom Green fan club at Manuka Oval. And then they pull him out of the side just as he's about to step foot in South Australia. So disappointing weekend last week. I traded him last week. The Giants said, I think 3 weeks on Friday afternoon. So I traded him then, had a lot of outs last week like everyone else did, Darcy Cameron, Hayden Young and the like, but decided to trade Tom Green, given there was a little bit more certainty around his timeline, which Leon Cameron, Adam Kingsley has confirmed this week. So I traded him, but again, if I held him last week, I wouldn't let that stop you from trading him now, like your position. Straight swap LDU could be there. I wrote that this morning again. If you've ignored me for the last 3 weeks, don't do it again. LDU, pretty much an exact swap for Tom Green. His time on ground is up again after that return game a couple of weeks ago against the Crows. 2 big KFC SuperCoach tons. So there's your straight swap if you don't have any money or you only want to use one trade.
Yeah, I think most people would be in this situation where you really only want to use the one trade. Mick here asking, would you use 2 to get him all the way up to a 600K plus player? Probably wouldn't be going Clary, but Petrarca, or I probably wouldn't go Petrarca either for that matter, given that he's playing mostly forward. I don't know. He's kicked 4 goals the last 2 weeks, whether he can keep that going. But, maybe a Libba or someone like that would be pretty attractive if you have heaps of trades. But most people not in that situation. So looking for a way to do it in one, and LDU is pretty much a straight swap. You're not worried about LDU's injuries at all, especially it just makes me nervous when we're going down to 1 or less trades to have someone in the midfield who has already been out with 2 or 3 different injuries at different stages this year.
I'm always worried out with LDU, but again, he's back moving the way he was in the opening 3 rounds. Yes, he could break down again, but we saw him carry something before that hamstring injury. We know he was late withdrawal down in Tassie, and then for the month after, he looked like he was carrying something. But looks over that now, had a good time off to get the body right, and not only the hamstring. So, again, anything can happen, but 6 rounds to go. I think his upside is worth the risk. Then again, I went back to Jordan De Goey last week as well for Tom Green, and he's ill this week and been away from Collingwood. So it's all happening again. But Tuke Miller is another one.
Yeah, I was going to ask about him.
Worth considering. 518K or thereabouts, 144K discount that is on his starting price. So huge value this week. And whether it was Stuart Dew or not, Miller was back in the midfield last week. We know Dew said post-match after the loss to Port Adelaide over here that Miller's, when he attended only 5% of bounces and played on the outside of the midfield, wasn't to ease him back in. It was more how the mix was looking good without him. So that was a bit of a worry. Last week, Tuke was back in there. He was pretty good. A KFC SuperCoach ton for him. His time on ground is increasing slowly too. Still not up to the 85 to 90%, which we've seen him in the past. So hopefully gets up to that soon. Does his CBAs go back to where it was in the opening few rounds? I'm not sure, because your man, my man, Sam Flanders, is in there, finally playing in the midfield.
Oh, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah, I think you put in your burning questions this week, like just how different would the season have been if it actually started there? Imagine he scored, 90s and 100s in his first 3 games instead of, 20s. Things would have been very different. And obviously there was something there. We weren't totally missing the mark, but could you actually bring him in now? What is he up to? Like 420K or something like that? It's probably a little bit much, isn't it? But the way he's playing, I suppose the worry is maybe does Tuke Miller's midfield time start to slowly go up, and in the end Flanders gets pushed out a bit to a wing or a forward flank or something. But he's their best midfielder at the moment, so you wouldn't be moving him, would you? Yeah,
I do agree with the Miller assessment. Not that it pushes him out as such, but maybe it takes away a little bit from his output for 29K. I wouldn't be, say, targeting him unless you sort of need the money from someone else. You're coming down from Green. Maybe you've got a few trades left and you want to make another upgrade and you use the money there. Or maybe Angus Sheldrick, the young Swan, up to about 346, I think it is. He is in doubt to play for the rest of the year. Might not step on the field again in 2023. Had ankle surgery during the week, the Swans confirmed. So you can get to Sheldrick to Flanders. Won't cost you a lot. And Flanders is a good on-field option from here if you need it. But I wouldn't sort of be targeting him given Miller coming back and given it's still only a small sample size from the young son.
So if you're in a situation like me where I've got another trade that I might want to be able to save a little bit of money on the Tom Green trade to help with something else, there's a couple of questions about it here, which we'll get to very shortly. But 518K I could do that, do my 2 trades, and I'd have about $5,000 left in the bank and 1 trade. Or I could find someone even a little bit cheaper. Maybe Jack Steele's just on the 500K. Dusty Martin does tempt me, but I'm clearly biased. Nazai Wanganeen Miller is 460 odd K, and he's got a great run coming up at Marvel Stadium. If I go someone like that, how important do you think it would be to have 1 trade left and maybe 40 or 50 grand in the bank, rather than, basically nothing, which means if something happens between now and the rest of the year and I have to use that one trade, I'm very limited in just it would be a straight swap, whoever it is. And if it's someone who does their hamstring in the first 5 minutes of the game, I'm probably not going to have many options. But do you worry about having cash in the bank at this stage?
It's a good question. Ideally, you do have a bit of wiggle room there, but we always often talk about compromising on the selection and on the premium. And I think if you're going down further from the price bracket you're talking, below your Tuke Millers, Jack Steele's been pretty good the last couple of weeks. He probably fits in there. But other than that, you are maybe compromising a little bit on the selection, and then maybe you don't even need the money in the end as well. So it's probably a more conservative play. I'd spend the cash on the play you want. And then, it's not great advice, but sort of hope for the best. I think you use your trade where you need it, but I wouldn't compromise too much. Tom Atkins is an interesting one from Geelong, 482K. I haven't mentioned him at all. Sort of bobbed up again in 3K SuperCoach tons on the trot, doing some good stuff in the midfield again, small sample size. But I'd go with the play you want first hour. If you decide that is someone below Tuke Miller and you're happy with that, then do it. But I wouldn't compromise too much. I don't think you want to get bang for your buck with your on-field premium for the last 6 rounds, I think.
50 call. Tuke or Jack Steele, who would you take?
Tuke, I think. Jack's been good the last couple of weeks, but we know how good Tuke is, and I think he's just building back into it in that game time. 76% last week's pretty low for him.
Yeah. I mean, I love Jack Steele, but it's been a tough year in a way, and hopefully he's back on the right track and scores well for the rest of the year. But given what's happened so far, it would be a little bit of a worry. Now, if you've got a bit of money and you can afford to go up from Tom Green, I do really like Darcy Parish. I'm about $2,000 short of just being able to get him in one trade. I think he's about 589, but that's a pretty good price considering Essendon has West Coast and North coming up in a couple of weeks. Or would you use some DPPs and get someone like Luke Ryan?
Hard one. I like Parish too. I agree with you. He's one I would have liked to get in last week, just couldn't afford him in the Tom Green trade. Luke Ryan's been massive. We know he's been one of the biggest scorers in the past 5 weeks in KFC SuperCoach. A little bit quieter against the Magpies last weekend. Yeah, it's a hard one. I'm probably leaning just towards Parish, I reckon, still.
Yeah, he's been really good since he's come back. A couple of really big scores, and even last week when Essendon was terrible, I think he was their highest scorer in the 90s. So,
nice pod.
Yeah, he'd be a great pod. Now, this is the big question that I'm thinking about as well, and I'm clearly not the only one. Kieran Briggs has been unbelievable since we brought him in, but now it's just has he hit the wall a little bit? You're certainly starting to notice the difference between having him at R2 and teams that have Tim English when there's a 100-point gap like there was last week. And Briggs is actually, I think he lost about $5,000 last week. So the first time he's gone down in money since he's come in. Would you bite the bullet and trade him out, knowing that he has a pretty tough matchup this week in who's he got? Jared Witts, who's pretty hard to score against. And then you've got Tim English, who's likely to go massive again against Essendon on Friday night. So it's probably, I don't know how much money you'd need to get from Briggs to English. That's probably not going to happen. But Max Gawn is sitting right there at about 550K. Not too much of a jump to get to him off, obviously, an unbelievable game last week. But Simon Goodwin saying, we're just going to leave Brody Grundy in the VFL to learn his forward craft for another week or two. Can we back in Gawn to be Max Gawn for 6 more rounds?
I think so. If I was in that spot, I'd be trading Briggs to Gawn. A question here, last trade, that makes it a little bit harder. Obviously, that would probably be you as well. But sometimes you got to take a bit of a punt, as long as you've got the cover, because we've seen what's happened just in the last 2 weeks alone. You're going to need it. So if you're short on the bench and you don't have it, keep that trade, because what if another big name goes down? What about another Josh Dunkley incident in the last 3 rounds and you're carrying a 0 or you're carrying a Ryan Marrick, who was pretty good last week, but say he gets dropped again like he did on Thursday night last week and you've got no cover for that sort of injury in the last 3 rounds, that would hurt. But if your cover's okay, you got something to fall back on if it does blow up. I'd like the Briggs to Gawn move. He looked a little bit tired last week over here at Adelaide Oval. We know Matt Flynn's been hovering around the emergencies for some time now. Could they give him a rest? Maybe, because we know it's a hard caper being a ruckman, a solo ruckman in the AFL, and he's not a young kid or anything anymore, but still taking on that responsibility and that workload sort of for the first time over a extended period is going to wear him down a little bit. So something could happen. We're not saying it will happen, but again, maybe even they bring in Flynn and just give him a chop out and Briggs sits a bit more forward, because we know he can take a mark up forward. He's done that in the past as well, playing with Flynn over the past couple of seasons. So ideally, if you've got the cover, I'd do it. What are you thinking?
Yeah. No, I think I will. That actually, it would be my second last trade. So if it took me to 0, I probably wouldn't do it, I don't think. But with one left, I think I'm going to bite the bullet, because just that gap from Briggs to people who have an English or obviously Gawn last week in the ruck is just getting really hard to overcome now. So I think Briggs to Gawn, I'll give that a tick. Now, this one's a bit trickier though. What about people who attempted to trade Rowan Marshall to Gawn? Obviously, Marshall had an absolute stinker last week, 58 points. I think he was on 17 at halftime. Which goes to show how hard a matchup Jared Witts is. But he's been pretty good for most of the year. But Gawn, obviously, extremely tempting. I think that's pretty much a straight swap price-wise. You might even make some money on the deal there. So I guess it's how much do we trust Marshall, and what do we think Gawn can actually score? He's not going to score 200 every week, but we know how big he can go. And this trade of bringing Grundy in, even if he doesn't play again, in a weird way, it might actually turn out to be a masterstroke from Melbourne, because they've just kept Max fresh for the first 17 rounds, and now they can unleash him for the run home in the finals.
Well, Marshall did score 149 against the Demons the previous week, average 111 through those 17 rounds. So it was poor last week. The Saints weren't great. The Suns were good. I don't think the total points gap is going to be massive from this point onwards. Of course, if Gawn goes 200 again in the last 6 weeks, then it might separate them a bit. But we know Marshall can go big too. So I don't think it's going to be too much of a difference. I reckon it's more of a league play. If you're playing for your leagues now, you've kept some trades up your sleeve, it's your real get a point of difference finals winning move would be trade a Marshall to Gawn, given how popular Rowan Marshall is too. Or maybe you're behind in the matchup and you wait till later in the week. But we don't know, Mick, how many trades you've got left. But I wouldn't be sort of using your last trade, maybe even your last 2 trades on Marshall to Gawn, given all the stuff that's happening in KFC SuperCoach. So more of a league-focused play, maybe, if you need something to stay alive.
Yeah, I agree with that. Get through a couple of quick ones before we get to some captaincy talk. Alex here looking at Sam Walsh. I mean, good matchup this week against West Coast, but he just hasn't been the same Sam Walsh, has he, this year? I don't know if I'd be going there. Is he about 25, 30K? I think I'd rather have a Took or someone like that.
Yeah, I agree. I looked at him last week with the Tom Green trade, and maybe that's where Alex is looking this week, or a lot of KFC SuperCoaches might be. I went with Jordan De Goey in the end. I think just his scoring power and his form as the main man, pretty much in that midfield, that constant, that centre bounces with everyone else sort of moving around a bit. So, of course, he might be sick this week, but I overlooked Walsh for that reason. It's just been a little bit hit and miss, and underwhelming is probably the right word for Sam Walsh.
Yeah, maybe one to look at next year. It would be a pretty good price. Now, Hayden's actually brought up a potential bargain here. Jeremy Cameron, just looked him up. He's 351,000. Does play Brisbane at the Gabba this week, though.
Yeah, this is Abdul, the SuperCoach oddfather. I don't know. We've seen Jeremy Cameron do it before in the back end of the year, win some KFC SuperCoach finals. But I'd probably just let it go this week and then maybe look at it back-to-back games at GMHBA after the Lions at the Gabba this week, Freo and Port. So that's probably when you look at it, I think. Still be cheap.
He's got a break even of 125, so it'll probably be even cheaper
Yeah.
next week. Quickly, Aaron, unfortunately, the answer is yes. Matthew Nix said today he definitely won't play, so have contingency plans for him. And a quick shout out here for Wayne, obviously a DVT of the KFC SuperCoach investor, Daniel Bagala, who was on last week, using his favourite line from Gattaca, the movie, about not saving anything for the swim back. And he's gone all out, and it paid off with a 2.66 last week. So, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, we miss the GOAT, Dan Bagala. It was a welcome sight. Him last week in a week of gloom for KFC SuperCoaches. We saw him in his new artwork. So shout out to the investor. Might be listening in, but well done, Wayne. Massive score.
Yeah, we'll hopefully get some more from Dan before the end of the season. So captaincy obviously gets more and more important every week when we have fewer trades and less things to differentiate our teams. And this week it's Friday night. The footy is on, and your KFC Friday night feast is on its way. Score free delivery on your Friday night footy feast every Friday when ordering through the KFC app or kfc.com.au. It's game on, and with no Thursday night footy this week, we can load up on the KFC for Friday night, Essendon and the Bulldogs, and there's some pretty good captaincy options there, Phantom.
You still have to maybe get some KFC on Thursday night, I reckon, tonight. Plenty of sport on TV tonight, so I'll be heading down to KFC, I reckon. Thursday and Friday night, it's what I look forward to in my weeks. But Friday night, Essendon and the Bulldogs, you can't do this. But Tim English, it's hard to overlook him as VC after what he did last week, what he's done for the year. So I'll be going him VC on Friday night. Pretty easy selection there. It becomes a little bit more difficult after that in terms of captain Lachie Neale against the Cats at the Gabba on Saturday afternoon. But we saw Mark O'Connor do a really good job on Zach Merritt last week. So does Chris Scott do that again to Lachie Neale? We know how he sometimes struggles with opposition attention. So you probably overlook Lachie Neale maybe as captain, especially. Josh Dunkley coming in. Can you trust him to be okay off that calf in a couple of weeks out? Maybe he's got to step up if Lachie gets shut down again. But otherwise, Rory Laird would have been a good option at the MCG. Yeah. Jordan Dawson's there. We know he's good. He's good in big games. Jordan Dawson at the G a few weeks ago against the Magpies, he was huge, almost side over the line. So you have to think about Jordan Dawson there. But it might be a tough week. Nick Dacos against the Power here on Saturday night as well. He could be a fullback captain option. We know he dominated the Power last time out the MCG, even when Ken Hinkley said, or the Power said about they were going to put some attention into him. I think Lachie Jones went to him in the first bounce. Probably the only time he saw him the whole day was before the siren went. So you think Nick Dacos probably not a bad option as C or Jordan Dawson for me. What do you think?
What about Gawn against Rob if I brought him in this week?
Yep, I like it. Yep. If I had him, I'd probably do pretty similar as a fullback captain option. What about VC?
Well, if you've got Dan Houston as the number one coach in KFC SuperCoach at the moment, Harry had a good chat to him on the official podcast this week, and I would recommend people listen to that because, he was really interesting guy to talk to, and he brought in Dan Houston about 3 weeks ago, and it's absolutely paid off with a couple of monster scores. So as a VC, I definitely don't mind him. I can't see Collingwood putting a heap of attention into him. Probably a tougher matchup there, but he can definitely go absolutely massive. And then, Dawson, as you said, has a good record against the best teams when the Crows play those big games. So even though it's at the G, I don't mind him. Who have the Swans got this week for someone suggesting Errol Gordon against Freo over in Perth? Not so sure. Hard game to tip that one. I mean, if you've got anyone from Carlton against West Coast that you'd potentially look at them. And I think maybe for me, it's just going to be probably the Bont on Friday night.
Yep.
Or maybe Zach Merritt in that game. I mean, the Bulldogs don't tag or anything either.
No.
And then that would allow me to, I don't mind Gawn. If I bring him in, I'll probably be tempted to go there. But if you just want a really safe backup captain, I think Tim Taranto against Hawthorn is a pretty good shout as well on the Saturday. Probably not going to get a 150, but you pretty much lock in a 115, 120 plus He's done that just about every week after he had a couple of down ones recently, but he was back last week with the sort of scoring we know he can do. So I don't mind him as just a safe backup captain. But yeah, it might be, as we saw last week, those Thursday and Friday night games just produced some ridiculous scores. So see what happens, and then maybe how your matchups are looking and things like that, and whether you want to play safe or you want to try and find someone who could score you a 175.
What about James Sicily in that game?
Oh, wow. Wow.
Against the Tigers, speaking of difference makers, we said Gawn's going to be that with the run home. I think we said that last week. Sicily could be the difference or the big pod play in the run home. But obviously we didn't think about what Eddie Ford could do to him. But can he bounce back against the Tigers? You know, you probably don't expect Andrew McQuall to do anything similar to what Ratton did with Ford last week. What do you reckon as an owner? Would you consider him as a VC or C?
To be honest, amazing though. I didn't even think about him because I've just completely scrubbed him from my mind after what happened last week, bringing him in, and then he scored I think it's his lowest score in about 3 years, getting tagged by Eddie Ford, just unbelievable against North Melbourne. But he does have a fantastic record against Richmond, who, as you say, don't really tag, don't put defensive forwards or anything in. I think Ryan Mansell might be a chance to come in this week, actually. He was best on ground in the VFL, so that's a sort of job maybe they would give him, but he has a very good record against Richmond. His last three, 118, 141, 128, and Richmond has given up some big scores to those sort of intercept markers this year. So they're the kind of team that sort of blaze away a little bit into the forward line, and so long as Sicily doesn't have to play a lockdown role, which there's not many forwards there for him to do that on, he can just drift around and take lots of marks. So he could definitely go big. Whether I would be brave enough, maybe VC. I don't think I could trust him with the captain.
Yeah, it's a fair call. Again, it'd be hard to overlook the VC on Friday night, but we know how big James Sicily can go, and you wouldn't expect him to struggle like that again at the MCG.
No, I don't think so. I think, he's got Richmond this week and St Kilda next week, so he's got a chance to make up all those points that he didn't score for us last weekend. That's what I'm hoping. Anyway, but good luck, everybody out there, with your captains, with your trades. We're probably not going to trade Rory Laird, but hopefully there's no more carnage between now and Friday night. Based on last week, there's bound to be at least 2 or 3 more things that go wrong. So fingers crossed we get through another week. Thanks, Phantom, for jumping on. Hope you have another big score and chase down. I mean, is Dan Batten still, is that a realistic option to catch him before the end of the year?
No, he's too far ahead. He's finally having a decent year, Once a decade's good for Dan Batten, so well done to him. Tim Mitchell, though, our friend, he's the one. Still a long way from him, but we'll have a crack at chasing him down.
Well, he's sort of going in opposite directions at the moment, based on that 1 week anyway. We'll see what happens in round 19. Good luck, everybody, and we'll catch you again very soon.